I'm Jay Horton. I make movies that make money, and this is Filmmakers On. Jeremy Norrie directed his first feature film in 2019, a documentary, and since then has directed about 20 more. And full transparency, I've worked with him on on all of them. But I will say that in addition to being able to make movies very fast, he also has a ton of heart mixed with a ton of ambition. Let's do the interview thing. Jesus. It's so funny that we did so many movies in such a short time.
Oh, I love it. I think that makes us like 1% of the filmmaking industry, because nobody does what we're doing.
Right.
We're very unique, and I like being unique.
Yeah, I agree. So I am here today with filmmaker Jeremy Norrie. I've been trying to figure out how to play this interview because we work together so closely. I've been working with Jeremy now for a little over 2 years. Is it over 2 years now?
I think we're getting there.
Yeah,
it's like right around that mark.
So you've directed, like at least 19 movies in the last 2 years, and I'm pretty sure we got 5 or 6 in post-production right now.
Yeah, it's new to me also. So I don't come from a filmmaking background, right? So when I learned about kind of what directing for documentary filmmaking was, kind of as it's been going on, I've watched some videos, I've learned trial and error a little bit, and I think it's going pretty well.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts, but what was your first like foray into filmmaking? I mean, wait, let me take that back. Did you want to be a filmmaker?
This is something I actually really like to talk about. So I made like this really crude film with 2 VCRs and a Discman when it was in the 90s, maybe 2000, right around that mark, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was my first time I ever went to the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam. And I'd never been to Amsterdam or Holland or I'd been when I was a kid to the UK, but I don't really remember that. So it was my first big vacation to Europe, and it was just glorious. We were like 19 or something. We were kids and we went crazy, we did all this stuff. And I took this video camera everywhere we went. So I had like 10 hours of footage to cut down, and I cut it all down with these 2 VCRs, and I put music to it with the Discman, and I made like a little film about our vacation. And
that film, like people can see that on YouTube, correct?
Yes. And okay. I'm going to make a new YouTube channel, and I plan to include it on there too, but it is on there. I believe it is titled Isaac and Jeremy Go to Amsterdam.
Perfect. Kind of a Curious George title. I like it.
Like for me, it was Harold and Kumar were supposed to go to Amsterdam, and then they never did.
So that was your first like experience with it. But did you ever like have any inkling that it was something you wanted to try to do like professionally at all?
I thought I was good at it. I personally really like that film, and I didn't know if it was just me because it was a film about me, or if other people liked it. And some people did seem to like it, and I always thought that I should be into the film business. I always had a tie to it. Even growing up, I was in like all the school plays and stuff like that. And we won the lip sync contest. I did the entertainment stuff like as a kid. And I didn't do it in high school. And I always regretted that. The opportunity just never really presented itself as I was growing up. It seemed like something that was unattainable. So I had those thoughts of like, I'll meet somebody at a party and they'll be like, hey, you should be in my movie or something. But like, other than that, I didn't think it would ever really happen for me.
You were involved pretty heavily in the cannabis industry, and your first film project revolved around that. And this is well before me and you met. So can you talk a little bit about how that came together?
My first film project was about an event that I was throwing in the cannabis industry. and we were having a competition of concentrated cannabis that later went on to include, normal cannabis flower and edibles. And we were doing that competition internationally. We went all over the United States at first, and then eventually we went to Spain and we went to Amsterdam. And each year we did maybe 6 or 7 events or so. The first year, near the end, I started realizing we are making a huge error by not filming these events and capturing this. Some other people were filming them, luckily, but it was sometimes difficult to get a hold of those films, or sometimes they just kind of abandoned the project. It never went anywhere for them, or it seemed like I should be doing this. We should have it to be useful for our event. So we started filming. 2 things kind of happened right away. Originally, I thought this was just going to be promotional for the event. The price of how much it cost to film these events was much higher than I had previously thought. And then the quality of what we were getting was also much better than I thought we were going to get. And like kind of the way he was doing it almost was like a documentary film, right? He was doing these interviews and he was also filming the event. Normally when you had a highlight reel from one of these events, it was just a bunch of B-roll cut to music, basically. So I thought, hey, this seems like maybe we could make something more of this than just a bunch of promotional videos. And maybe we could document this whole thing that we're doing and make a film about kind of this special movement that we were a part of and kind of leading at that time. So we started filming multiple events. I paid all this money, which is ridiculous. Then it just kind of, the events started kind of dwindling out eventually, and our money to do stuff started getting less and less. And then there was like some miscommunication, and this whole thing just started to drag out a long time. So it was multiple years before I ever got an edited version of any kind of documentary type thing. We had little highlight things that came a couple chunks along the way, kind of early on. But then there was this miscommunication that maybe the project was not going anywhere or something. And multiple years kind of went by before we were able to kind of communicate properly and get the ball rolling.
And so basically then they ended up finishing like a 40-minute version of a documentary, and you wanted to extend it into more of a feature length thing.
So 2 things happened. So it was a grueling process of like kind of him communicating with me that there was essentially no storyline, and here's what he had come up with. And then me kind of taking little chunks of things and kind of rearranging it, and then coming up with little ideas on transitions to kind of keep the story going.
And let me pause you there just for 1 second. I just want to make an aside to other filmmakers watching. You hear this a lot amongst newer documentary editors or documentary filmmakers. They'll look at raw footage of like, there's no story here. We don't have any story. If there is enough footage and interviews, you can make a story out of almost anything. You can find your story. Like there is a story. There usually is a story to be found. Anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
Yes, when you're as good of an editor as Jason is, you can make a sandwich into a beautiful Reuben.
Well, I wouldn't say it was a sandwich, but yes, the thought is correct.
Well, I also thought there was a story there, and I thought, this is just him kind of not really seeing what I'm seeing. And it was my vision anyway.
Yeah,
so,
and to be fair to him, when I initially looked at some of this footage, I didn't 100% see it either. It was through conversations with you and going over the thing, and I realized, oh yeah, there's more than enough here to do. There's probably 6 different directions story-wise we could go with that footage and those interviews.
Sure. So I will also, in his defense, say the storyline was kind of choppy in this original cut. I had to shoot additional interviews to create a much better storyline to
Gotcha.
keep everything going. But we did the best we could with this original one. The 40-minute thing I thought was really good. And everybody I showed it to in the cannabis industry was like, oh my God, this will for sure be on Netflix. You know, like this huge praise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started trying to shop it around. There's all kinds of people in our industry that have been involved in shows or claim to work for certain channels or you know, have these abilities to kind of get things in front of the proper eyes.
Right.
None of it was true. Okay. I went to every single one and nobody could do anything. They had all these weird ideas about me putting more money into it. And, you know, it was a dead end for a long time. And then through a friend of a friend of a friend, I finally met the person that could help me. And that was a producer named Paul. And he lived in Vegas. And I went out and I met him. And then he introduced me to other people like yourself. Mm-hmm. And I was working on The Secret Cup with another person, and they also reiterated the storyline problems and various other theoretical problems. And they thought that I should shoot some other interviews to make it better and then extend it to be an hour long, and that maybe it could be on one of these bigger channels, you know. Right. And so that gave me hope, you know, and I worked on it a little while, but that also seemed to kind of dead end or stall out. And I was getting anxious to get it out, you know. At this point, it was like 7-ish years working on the project. So it's like, for me, I just want it to be over and done with to a certain extent, but I also have this like passionate tie to it where I want it to be this great thing. So I don't want to just, you know, throw it out there.
Right.
So
now at this point too, are you thinking as far as filmmaking goes, like this is how it works? Like as far as documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, to me, I had always seen that films took multiple years to make. People were putting all this effort. They would follow people around for these long periods of time. That there was, I really didn't think much about it as a viewer of the documentaries. You know, it was kind of funny how I was just a viewer. I wasn't breaking it down on, oh, they shot this scene this way or that. Maybe sometimes I would notice stuff like that in you know, normal movies, like theatrical narrative movie. Mm-hmm. I'd never really thought about that too much with documentaries. Doing my own project was the first time I ever really learned anything about it. And then kind of working on it secondhand with this other guy where I was like taking these notes and like cut it from here to there and move this over here and there and like doing all that kind of stuff. I wondered if that was how it worked or not. I thought, well, this is just what I think I would do. This is the best I could do. It was interesting to kind of see some of the stuff I thought was right, and then some stuff obviously not so right.
So then you know, me and I'll fill in a couple of blanks here though. So me and Jeremy met, and man, you had such a like Jeremy has a great personality. It's very personable. He's everything that would make for a good documentary director, producer. He makes people at ease and whatnot. So we started working together. I, you know, signed on to complete that project, which we are doing now. But prior to that, we've created, you know, almost, you know, 25 movies together. So yeah. When you first started, when I first asked you just, okay, you're going to direct these, you're going to go interview these people. What in your head, what was the job?
The first couple things we worked on, I like wrote the questions and stuff, but I didn't physically do the interviews, right?
Oh, that's right. I did the first two, right?
Yeah.
You the first one?
Well, we thought it was going to be one project, right?
But oh yeah, no, it was two. But yeah, okay. Yeah.
I was observing you doing the interview. And then from there, I actually watched some YouTube videos about doing interviews. So, and then I had been interviewed many times in the cannabis industry. So there was that experience that all kind of went into it. And I knew the interviewers that I liked talking to, and I knew the interviewers that it was like painful to, you know? And so I know how to be authentic to myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I felt confident about doing those interviews, and I felt like I could really make the project better by doing the interview myself.
Yeah.
I was essentially a conversationalist in all these things that I had to do. And even like in working, I used to be a telemarketer, and they would always tell me that I had a good voice and like all this stuff. So like I felt confident that this was something, not only could I take off some of the burden of you having to do everything in a movie, this is something I could maybe learn how to do and be good at.
Yeah.
And really be a filmmaker.
And from your initial education, you know, like from the YouTube videos and whatnot, like to this day, what were some of your major takeaways from that? Just like a couple of tips from it that you continue to use.
So one of the things was to definitely have a script, to have pre-written questions that you've thought about that kind of lead the storyline that you're hoping to tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
You come out with like some sort of an outline essentially of, this is where I want the movie to kind of go, or this is what I'm interested in, or whatever it is, you know. From that, have your questions kind of fit those different parts, so that at very least you have that. Another thing I also learned was that to not only go from that if they say something that is interesting and you want to ask them about it, ask them about it, because probably other people want to know about this thing too.
Mm.
And then also keep in mind that the viewer might not know anything about the subject, right? So anything that seems glaringly not obvious, right? So especially in cannabis, right? People say, reference things, and they'll just assume that everybody knows what a banger is or something. And then almost nobody that isn't way into cannabis knows what that is.
Yeah,
And
I had no clue.
Right. So then you have to explain it. If somebody says something like that, you have to then go back and say, hey, could you explain what this is? And keep that kind of like dumb it down, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of easy.
Yeah, and I'm actually finding now that you know, I've worked especially on the cannabis stuff where I was kind of ignorant about a lot of it. It's interesting because you're riding a real fine line between like over explaining something like they're an idiot and you know, making it not confusing. It's a tightrope.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of subjects like that, sports subjects and things like that, where, you know, of course, everybody knows basketball and they know this terminology, but maybe they don't know this other terminology. And, you know.
So initially, when we were doing these, I mean, like you came, you know, we were going to do the cannabis ones, but like a lot of the first ones, like I was kind of like, hey, let's do a documentary on this or that. But you know, over the course of our relationship, like, you know, it's like you're bringing a lot of the ideas now. So
Sure.
like, what do you think makes for a documentary, for a good documentary for you to make?
Okay, so this is an ongoing process of kind of what is the end goal, right? So obviously, part of filmmaking is making money. And so the end goal for us is always to make something that is going to be profitable, right? That's part of it. But I also like, I come from this whole life of just being creative and doing kind of what I want, and being unapologetic to a certain degree, and just going against the curve. You know, everybody's going this way, I go that way. In that, many beautiful things have happened, right? So, and I'm a weirdo. So there's that. So the first thing that happened, I said to Paul, like, oh, I have all these cannabis ideas of shows that I want to make. And he's like, hey, I know a guy that's making low budget stuff. He would probably be into making some of these things. Do you want to just make them with him? And at first I was like, no, I really want them to be big exposure. And it took him a second time of saying it to me, where I was like, you know what? It's more important that this story just gets told. And I don't really care what happens with it, if it makes a bunch of money or if it doesn't make a bunch of money. And this is the only way we're going to kind of learn if this stuff's going to work or not.
Mm.
So let's just try it. And so we did a couple of the cannabis ones and they kind of worked, right? Like it was
Yeah.
like, almost like they were there. It wasn't anything that, set us up for life or anything, but
No.
they were worth doing.
Yeah, they
So
definitely, like, through those couple, it definitely showed, like, both creatively and financially, that it was a viable business model. Nobody's going to get rich making, documentaries at that level, but they can shed light on a subject.
right.
And I honestly, out of all the stuff I've done up to that point, like, I'm really proud, moralistically, of those. Like, I'm really proud to do something that, like, I feel like means something beyond entertainment, or beyond money. So for me anyway, that was really the cool thing about it.
Yeah, and so when I worked with you, and then I had worked with other filmmakers through this whole process,
Mm,
and some people are very nice, some people are very driven to like get profits or like whatever it is, and you had a very unique personality for filmmaking. You were similar to me, like an honest person, caring, open to doing these projects, and if they didn't make money, at least you had the value of doing the right thing, essentially, or helping this good cause or whatever it is.
yeah.
We did these cannabis ones and they went all right, and then you called me up, I remember one day, and you're like, hey, these are the projects that make money. And you started listing off a bunch of the titles, and then it was a bunch of stuff. I was like, oh, I'm into that. Oh, I know. You said like uh, extreme sports or something like that, and I thought,
Mhm.
oh, fighting. That used to be what I was into before I was into the cannabis scene, and I know people in that world. Let's do something on that. And so it just was a bunch of different topics that maybe could work, that I was passionate about anyway. So let's do them. And
Right.
that just got the ball rolling.
Yeah, and another interesting thing that I think we aligned on, like, pretty early on too, is regardless of the subject we were doing, we were taking a fairly, like, positive take on it, or informative, but like, there's no exploitation, there's no, like, none of that, like, bait and switch, like filmmaking, where we're trying to make somebody look bad or turn them into a joke. Because we've done some pretty, outlandish subjects to the mainstream. Like, we've done stuff on Bigfoot and aliens, and we're doing one on ghosts right now. So, but what I really like about doing all that stuff is, it's not coming from a cash grab mentality. It is trying to, shed a light on something someone else is very passionate about, and something that maybe we're interested in.
Yeah, that's what I like about it too. And I think that the people from those places of thought, from Bigfoot to aliens to ghosts to wherever, they're kind of used to being mocked, and they're used to people putting a spin on whatever the project is. So it might be like a comedy spin, or like a really scary, horror kind of spin to it, or
Overly dramatic.
yeah, it just comes off not believable, right? Every single time it just comes off like, I don't know for sure anything like really more about this subject, if it's true or not true. I know
Mm,
this kind of agenda story that's being told, but our thing is very open. It like we we kind of touch on both things. We'll ask them about the things they want to talk about, of course. Then I'll hit them with also like, here's the things that people say about you that mean like why it's not true.
mm,
What do you have to say about that?
right.
And it's interesting to see what they have to say sometimes. Sometimes it's really reasonable, right? You're like, oh, okay. that's not that outlandish at all. That could be the actual case.
And I think too, just like any business, it kind of gets into a point where not every project you really want to do is going to be a moneymaker. You do need to have some money makers. So there are some projects which, we won't name publicly, but that we're going to do this project primarily because we think it's going to make more money, but we still attack it with that same integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally the way that it's gone. And I'm just fortunate that a lot of these subjects that could be valuable, financially, are things I'm genuinely interested in still. And I'm just like that diverse of a person that I'm constantly getting into all kinds of new weird stuff.
So what's some stuff that hasn't come out or that you want to do, some topics that you'd like to do?
So we started the psychedelic medicine one, right? But in that process, I learned about psychedelics for sports. And I never thought about that. And meeting the person that told me about it, he's like a famous MMA fighter guy, right? And so I'd love to do that story, and I want to pursue that soon. I'm kind of close to wrapping this one about one of the first, possibly the first Black Comedy Awards.
That's a departure too.
Yeah, that's way different than anything else we've done, and so that'll be interesting. But that same theme is kind of in all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I love that positive message that comes along with so many of our projects.
One other thing I did want to get into a little bit, because we've talked about this privately before, but like it seems like on the business side that a lot of the work that you've done over the years has a event promoter, working in cannabis, like doing that stuff for so many years, that lends itself to the business side of movie making.
I would agree. Yeah. The cannabis industry in general parallels the way that movie making is for most movie makers, especially because there's this long time period between completing projects. So it gives you all this time to kind of like accomplish things at your own pace. And, you might have some days you do a crazy amount of work and you don't sleep. And you might have some days where you just totally goof off and do whatever. And that's kind of how the cannabis industry is. And also the events and what have you, they definitely parallel filmmaking in that, like, you have to be a good communicator, right? And so for documentaries, that's super important. You have to recognize somebody that's a good interview, somebody that's not. That can be difficult, especially when they're your friends and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. Then you also have to just be kind of able to move on quickly, problem solve quickly. That stuff is very, very common in events.
Where are some where are some places, like if people wanted to keep up with you, like online? I know you have a website, like social media, stuff like that.
Yes. So my website is theskyisland.com. And the social media is Sky Island Storytelling on Instagram and on Facebook. And I think it's Sky Island Stories on Twitter.
If you're liking these interviews, don't forget to subscribe and check out a few of my movies at www.zapruderflix.com. But whatever you do, keep making movies.